I'm Hannah Whitaker, 35, and tonight I'm standing barefoot on a quiet strip of Malibu sand with the keys to a house I paid for in full. The tide rolls in like a measured breath, steady and calm, while the last light fades behind the palms that frame my deck. I should be celebrating, but my phone is face down on the railing, buzzing every few minutes like a hornet trapped under glass. 15 years of swallowing slights can train a woman to ignore a lot, but not the call I know is coming. I've spent a career building order out of chaos for other people, yet nothing prepared me for family who confuses kindness with permission. The windows behind me glow warm, new linen still crisp my office, overlooking the water like a promise I made to myself. All I wanted was one quiet night, one clean breath, and then the phone rings. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your ground when someone mistook your grace for weakness. I didn't grow up anywhere near oceanfront glass and steel. My parents ran a small hardware store off a county road in Indiana, the kind of place where the bell over the door never stopped jingling and everybody knew who needed an extra week to pay. Work was simple. Show up, tell the truth, count the bolts twice. My mother kept a coffee can under the sink for church potlucks and emergencies. My father kept his word like it was the only currency that mattered. Those were my lessons: help without being asked, and never confuse someone's volume for their value. I carried that with me through state school, through a first job in logistics, where the office chairs squeaked and the air always smelled faintly like printer toner and burned coffee. Success came one project at a time, never flashy, always documented. When I met Andrew, I was already the youngest director at North Star Dynamics, a company with glass elevators, and a habit of underestimating people who didn't talk over others in meetings. Andrew was kind and curious, the sort of man who looked you in the eye when you spoke. His world charity balls, club dinners, second homes felt like a movie set where the extras had scripts, and I hadn't been given mine yet. I learned that linen napkins don't make a table warmer and that old money can be very loud. I also learned that some people will assume a quiet woman must be served rather than serving a purpose. Lorraine liked me at first, in the way you like a new vase, pretty replaceable, best when silent. She had a way of introducing me that made the air around us thinner. Andrew's wife, Hannah, she keeps busy downtown, as if my years of restructuring distribution networks were a hobby somewhere between Pilates and seasonal wreaths. I let it slide for longer than I should have. There's a lie we tell ourselves when we're trying to be good family. It's only one dinner. It's only one remark. It's only one night. Onlys add up. Somewhere between the winter fundraiser where I stood in a serving pantry refilling champagne because someone said I had the touch and the spring gala where Lorraine accidentally scheduled a family event over my board presentation, a seam inside me began to split. It didn't happen all at once, the decision to choose myself without apology. It was more like tide against rock repetition carving a new shape. The year I turned 35, a project I'd designed saved North Star $40 million in a single quarter, and the memo announcing the win listed the names of 3 men who hadn't touched a spreadsheet. I walked into the boardroom, laid down a folder with 6 pages of results and my resignation letter on top, and thanked them for the lessons, chief among them, how to be underestimated without losing your edge. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, Granite Harbor Global had wired a retainer for an 18-month consulting contract that valued me at what the work was worth. I opened Whitaker Strategies LLC, signed the paperwork with hands that didn't shake, and told no one outside my small circle. Not even Andrew. Not yet. The house on the water felt like a punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence I had been writing since college. 4 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling glass, a narrow path down to a private crescent of sand where the morning would break clean over the Pacific. I chose everything myself, the desk facing the horizon, the chair that wouldn't hurt my back, the linen in coastal blues that looked like sky pressed flat. Michael Alvarez, my attorney, structured the deed with the caution of a man who has seen too many people learn too late what boundaries should have been. The LLC held the title. The occupancy clause could have doubled as a sermon on consent. Redstone Protective programmed the locks with my thumbprint and mine alone. For the first time in years, I could hear my own voice in my head without anyone else's echo crowding it out. If you've ever lived on other people's terms, you know that peace has a sound. It's the quiet clink of a glass on new stone, the hush of surf under a moon, the soft thud of a book closing, because you can finally stop rereading the same paragraph. I stood on the deck, salt in the air and the lamp behind me turning the room gold, and I promised myself I would protect this life. I would welcome those who honored it, and I would turn away those who didn't. The phone on the railing buzzed again, longer this time, as if someone on the other end believed they had a key to me they'd been using for years. I flipped it over. Lorraine's name filled the screen. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was sugar-cut with steel. "We're moving in tomorrow, Hannah. Andrew says it's fine. I'll have the decorator at 9. The master suite, of course." The tide lifted and fell steady as breathing, and I felt the old seam inside me settle, not split. "No," I said, and the word landed like a door clicking shut. She laughed, the kind of sound that means a person has never heard that answer and doesn't intend to start now. "If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else." She said certain the rules that guided other people's lives did not apply to hers. The call ended with a brittle, satisfied little click, as if she'd placed an order and expected delivery. I stood there a few seconds longer, the house warm at my back, the ocean black and bright at once. Then I went inside, opened the file drawer where the deed and the operating agreement lived, and laid the pages on the table, like cards I'd been saving for exactly this hand. Redstone's number was already in my favorites. Michael's, too. Before the next wave curled and broke, my own voice was steady again as I began making the calls. By morning, there would be documents, there would be security, there would be a line no one would cross without consequence. And when Lorraine's car rolled up to my gate with a decorator and a smile, she would find something she had never planned for a woman prepared. Lorraine's call ended with that sharp little click, the sound of a woman, certain her word was law. I stood still for a long moment, letting the hum of the refrigerator and the roll of the surf settle around me. The house was new enough that the air still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedar. I walked through the kitchen barefoot on cool tile, tracing the edge of the counter with one hand until the trembling stopped. Then I sat at the desk facing the ocean and opened the folder labeled Whitaker Strategies, LLC. The deed lay inside, every clause highlighted, every signature clean. It wasn't just paper, it was armor. Michael answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, measured as always. "Evening. Hannah. Everything all right?" I told him about Lorraine's call, word for word. There was a pause, then the sound of keys tapping. "Send me a copy of the deed and the occupancy clause," he said. "I'll have cease and desist letters ready within the hour. No one enters that property without your written consent." I could almost hear him frown through the line, "and I'll call Redstone to post security before dawn." The steadiness in his tone worked like a sedative. The shaking in my hands eased. When I hung up, I walked back to the deck. The moon had risen higher, tracing silver on the water. For the first time since Lorraine's voice filled the line, I smiled. 15 years of biting my tongue had finally taught me something useful: how to act without announcing it. I made tea, packed the folder into a leather briefcase, and started a list of calls for morning attorney bank security firm, moving company. Every entry was a small act of control, reclaimed. Sleep came in pieces. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Lorraine sweeping through my doorway, designer shoes clicking on marble that wasn't hers. By dawn, resolve had replaced exhaustion. Redstone's team arrived at 6 sharp 2 officers in navy jackets with discreet earpieces. They checked every lock, tested the gate system, and confirmed that only my biometrics would open the doors. "You'll have peace here, Mrs. Whitaker," one of them said before taking his post by the gate. I believed him. At 8, Michael texted letters ready, delivering copies by noon. I poured another cup of coffee and called Andrew. He didn't pick up. 10 minutes later, a message arrived instead. 3 words that read like habit, not concern. "Can we talk?" I left it unanswered. Somewhere deep down, I still hoped he would drive down to the coast, look at me, and finally see the woman he'd married, not the extension of his mother's will. But silence has its own clarity. By mid-morning, the security feed blinked to life with movement at the gate. Lorraine's silver SUV rolled up first, followed by a white delivery truck and another car filled with women in linen and pearls. She stepped out in wide-brimmed sunglasses and announced herself before the guard could speak. "You can let us through. My son owns this property." The guard remained polite. "Ma'am, I'll need written authorization from the owner." "I am the owner," she snapped, waving a sheaf of papers. From my office upstairs, I watched the scene unfold on the screen. Her voice rose as she pointed toward the house toward me. The decorators lingered behind her, uncomfortable, while Barbara Caldwell tried to calm the situation. Lorraine ignored everyone. When the guard refused again, she yanked a small crowbar from the moving truck and marched to the gate. The image froze me, not from fear, but disbelief. The woman who once lectured me about class now stood on camera, ready to break into a house she didn't own. The guard's hand went to his radio. Within seconds, flashing lights appeared at the corner of the drive. I met the officers at the front walk, deed in hand. They examined the document, verified my identification, and nodded toward the gate. "We'll handle it." From the monitors, I saw Lorraine arguing, gesturing wildly as one of the policemen spoke to her. Eventually, she stepped back, her expression caught between fury and disbelief. She left only after the officers explained the word trespass in terms even she couldn't twist. As her SUV disappeared down the road, Redstone's chief turned to me. "That won't be her last visit," he said quietly. "But you're covered." I thanked him, though gratitude felt too small for what his calm professionalism gave me proof that I wasn't imagining the madness. When the driveway was empty again, I sat at the table and opened my laptop. A new notification blinked from Seaside Bank, unusual activity property, collateral inquiry. The timestamp matched the hour before Lorraine's arrival. My pulse quickened. I called the number on the alert and asked for the fraud department. Kevin Brooks introduced himself and listened as I explained the situation. Within minutes, he confirmed what I already suspected. "A loan application for $500,000 was filed yesterday using your Malibu address as collateral," he said. "Applicant listed as Lorraine Whitaker, owner. Signature appears inconsistent with records on file. I forwarded the deed and LLC papers to his secure email. We'll escalate this to federal review," he assured me. "You'll get an affidavit within 48 hours." By evening, Michael arrived with printed letters and a briefcase of supporting documents. We spread everything across the dining table: ownership certificates, bank statements, security footage. The legal trail was airtight. "She's not just pushing boundaries anymore," he said. "This is criminal. Wire fraud if she used electronic submission." He paused, scanning the footage of Lorraine with the crowbar. "We'll notify the Bureau tomorrow." I nodded, still watching the ocean through the glass. The surf rolled in and out, unbothered, endless. My phone lit again near dusk. It was Andrew at last. "Hannah, can we talk about this? Mom's upset. She says there's been a misunderstanding." His voice sounded smaller than I remembered a boy caught between two teachers. "It's not a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "It's theft." He sighed, long and heavy. "I'll come down tomorrow." But tomorrow felt late already. That night, I sat outside listening to the low thunder of waves against the rocks. In 15 years, Lorraine had taken pieces of my dignity in small, polite increments, confident I'd never push back. Now she'd taken a swing at my piece, and for once there would be proof: video signatures, timestamps, law. I thought of my parents back in Indiana, of how my father used to say that truth doesn't yell, it stands. Somewhere inside, a steadier version of myself straightened her shoulders and looked out at the dark horizon. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about ending a pattern. Before turning in, I sent one last email to Michael and copied Kevin Brooks. "Proceed with full documentation. I want every record preserved." Then I set the phone face down again. The house was quiet, except for the pulse of the tide against the pilings. Somewhere beyond the gate, a life built on intimidation was starting to crack. I didn't know yet how public the fracture would become, only that it was coming. The night felt different, heavy, but honest, like the moment before a storm decides to break. Morning light poured through the glass walls, sharp and golden, cutting across the stacks of paperwork Michael had left on the table the night before. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of waves brushing the sand outside. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and tried to focus on the simple rhythm of breathing in and out. On the screen in front of me, the security footage from the gate replayed again, the flash of Lorraine's silver SUV, the flash of metal in her hand, the way she'd pointed toward the house, like a general claiming new territory. Watching it a second time didn't dull the disbelief. It just reminded me how far she'd gone. Kevin Brooks called just after 8. "We've reviewed the application," he said, his voice calm and professional. "The loan was submitted online with a forged signature. The system flagged it because the property is held under your company's LLC. She used your full legal name." I felt my chest tighten as he continued. "We've opened a formal fraud case. The documentation will be forwarded to federal investigators this afternoon." I thanked him, though the words felt small against what he'd just confirmed. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a family spat anymore. It was crime. By 9, Michael was back at the house. He brought with him 2 folders, one with copies of the bank's findings, the other with affidavits and legal notices ready to send. We sat side by side at the dining table, while the surf murmured beyond the glass. "We'll serve these by courier," he said. "It's important she knows the line she's crossed in writing." He handed me a letter marked "Cease and Desist. Trespass and Fraudulent Claim." Seeing my name at the top made it real in a different way. I signed the pages slowly, steadying my pen between each line. The gate camera lit up again near 10. Lorraine was back, standing at the entrance with her phone to her ear, gesturing sharply. Through the microphone feed, her voice carried in bursts, anger wrapped in disbelief. "My son bought this property. I have every right to enter." The Redstone guard stood motionless, one hand resting lightly on the gate keypad. When he told her she needed written authorization from the legal owner, she threw her hands up and shouted, "I am the legal owner." Her words hit the air like stones, hollow and heavy. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. Every second was being recorded. Michael watched with me, his expression unreadable. "Let her talk," he murmured. "She's building your case for you." He was right. Lorraine paced for a while, calling someone else Barbara, maybe then finally drove off. Within minutes, notifications began appearing on my phone. Her social media page had exploded with posts about family betrayal and stolen property. There were photos too, pictures she'd taken from the online listing captions, claiming the Malibu house as her own. She even added a line that said, "So blessed to have such a generous son." I read the words twice before setting the phone down. At noon, Kevin called again. "You might want to brace yourself," he said carefully. "She just tried to verify the property details over the phone with our Beverly Hills branch. Claimed to be your authorized agent. We've documented it." I pressed a hand against my forehead. "Do you think she'll stop?" He hesitated before answering. "In my experience, people like this only stop when they're forced to." His tone wasn't cruel, just honest. By afternoon, Michael and I had built a timeline of everything Lorraine's impersonation of me on the phone with the realtor, the forged loan application, the trespassing attempt, and her public posts. Each event was supported by documents, recordings, and timestamps. "This will hold up anywhere," he said, tapping the stack of evidence. "She's left a trail of her own making." Still, I could feel the knot of tension sitting behind my ribs, heavy and unmoving. Justice on paper didn't erase the years of smaller cuts, the jokes, the glances, the constant reminders that I didn't belong. It didn't erase Andrew's silence either. He arrived that evening just before sunset, pulling into the drive in his navy sedan. I watched from the window as the guards let him through. He looked tired, suit jacket slung over one arm tie loosened like he'd fought traffic, and himself all the way down the coast. When he stepped inside, the smell of salt and asphalt came with him. "Hannah," he said quietly, "what is happening?" I gestured toward the papers on the table. "You tell me. Your mother forged my signature and tried to take out a loan on my house." He rubbed his eyes. "She said you overreacted." The words hung there, fragile and familiar. I took a breath, measured and slow. "You've spent 15 years calling her behavior difficult," I said. "This is felony-level difficult." He sank into a chair and stared at the documents. As he read, his face changed confusion, giving way to disbelief to something closer to shame. "I didn't know," he said finally. "She told me you'd bought the house for us." "I bought it for me," I said simply. "And for once, that's not up for debate." We sat in silence, the sound of waves filling the space between us. After a moment, he looked up. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let her consequences find her," I said. "She's made sure there's no other path left." The next morning brought more proof of how far Lorraine had gone. Barbara Caldwell called from the charity committee, her voice low with embarrassment. "Hannah, I don't know how to say this, but Lorraine's telling everyone she's moving into your Malibu home. She's scheduled a luncheon there next week. I thanked her for letting me know. After we hung up, I called Redstone's office and requested a temporary restriction on all deliveries guests and service staff. No one would step through those gates without clearance. That evening, the house was quiet again. I stood on the deck as the sky turned from orange to deep violet, the water catching every last glint of light. Somewhere inland, Lorraine was likely rehearsing another story for another audience, convinced her version of the truth would stick. But the evidence had already outpaced her words. Michael's courier had delivered the official notices to her address that morning, signed and time-stamped. Kevin's department had escalated the fraud report to federal authorities. The paper trail was no longer in my hands alone. It was in the system, permanent and traceable. When the wind picked up, I went inside and closed the sliding doors. The house felt different now, more fortress than retreat. Still, I was grateful for the safety it represented. I placed the stack of documents back into the briefcase and locked it in the office drawer. The lights from the hallway spilled across the floor, soft and gold. It should have felt like peace, but it didn't yet, not while Lorraine's lies were spreading faster than the truth could catch them. Andrew called later, his voice quiet through the speaker. "She's furious," he said. "She told her friends you're trying to ruin her reputation." I leaned against the counter, watching the dark outline of the waves beyond the window. "She's doing that on her own," I said. He sighed, the sound of defeat more than frustration. "She's insisting on speaking publicly about it. Some real estate event next week in Los Angeles. She says she'll set the record straight." I closed my eyes for a moment, recognizing the opportunity wrapped in his warning. "Good," I said finally. "Let her talk. The truth deserves an audience." We didn't speak after that. The call ended quietly, both of us knowing that the next time Lorraine opened her mouth in a room full of people, the fallout would reach farther than she ever imagined. I shut off the lights one by one, leaving only the soft hum of the ocean through the glass. Tomorrow would bring more noise, more headlines, more disbelief. But for now, I let the quiet hold me steady and certain. Somewhere on the horizon, the storm was gathering, and I was ready to meet it. The morning after Andrew's call, the fog rolled in thick and low over the ocean. From the deck, the beach looked like it had vanished, swallowed by gray light and moving air. I made coffee and watched the world blur for a while, that strange half-silence when everything feels suspended. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Michael. "The bank forwarded more documentation," he said. "Lorraine's forged loan application is now under review by federal investigators. We'll have confirmation by tomorrow." His calm steadiness made it easier to breathe. "What about the gala?" I asked. "It's still scheduled for next week," he said. "And yes, Lorraine's a featured sponsor." By noon, the fog had burned away, and the sunlight hit hard across the deck. I opened my laptop and pulled up the association's event page. There it was, her name in gold lettering, listed alongside a handful of major real estate investors. Lorraine Whitaker, gold sponsor. The theme, integrity and real estate. The irony landed like a dull ache in my chest. She had even posted about it that morning, writing, "Excited to share big news at next week's gala. Our new coastal acquisition marks a new chapter for the Whitaker legacy." Her words gathered dozens of congratulatory comments within minutes. None of them knew what was coming. Michael came by that evening with 2 folders tucked under his arm. He set them on the table beside the sliding glass doors. "Everything we've gathered," he said. "The deeds, the fraud reports, the social media posts, the bank affidavits. She's made the case for us." He paused, then looked up. "How public do you want this to be?" I thought about that for a long moment, watching the water shimmer beyond the glass. "As public as she's made her lies," I said. If she plans to announce her fantasy in front of 800 people, she deserves to meet the truth there too. Later that night, I called Diane. She answered from her office, city lights glowing behind her. "I've already heard some of the chatter," she said. "Lorraine's been telling anyone who will listen that her son bought her a beach estate. I explained what had happened, the forged loan, the trespassing attempt, the investigation." Diane listened quietly. "Hannah, I'm the keynote speaker at that gala," she said after a moment. "If you want, I can ensure you have a seat at the head table." "That might be useful," I replied, "but I don't want a scene." She gave a small laugh. "With the truth on your side, you won't need one." The next few days moved with quiet precision. Kevin Brooks sent a formal affidavit confirming the fraud. The applicant, Lorraine Whitaker, knowingly submitted forged documents claiming ownership of 2741 Pacific Coast Highway property legally held by Whitaker Strategies, LLC. The statement was notarized and sealed. Michael coordinated with Redstone to secure every camera angle from the attempted break-in, downloading copies to an encrypted drive. Each step tightened the net around her lies. Meanwhile, the whispers began to spread. Barbara called one afternoon, her voice uneasy. "Lorraine's saying she'll be unveiling the beach property during her sponsor speech at the gala. She's even invited half the committee for a luncheon there afterward." I thanked her, then asked if she would attend. "Of course," she said. "Someone needs to see the truth unfold." It was the first time I'd heard anyone in Lorraine's circle sound disillusioned. That evening, Andrew stopped by. He looked worn down, his shirt still creased from the day. "Mom's doubling down," he said. "She's convinced herself the house is hers. She keeps saying she'll prove it in front of everyone." I studied him for a long time. "And you?" I asked. "Where do you stand?" He hesitated. "I'm starting to see who she really is," he admitted. "But I wish this didn't have to be public." I shook my head. "You've wished for quiet your whole life, Andrew. Look where that's gotten us." After he left, I stood by the window until the sky turned black. The house lights reflected faintly against the glass, ghosting the room back at me. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to fit into a family that measured worth by appearances. How many times I'd chosen silence for the sake of peace. But silence only feeds entitlement. Now, for the first time, I had evidence strong enough to be heard. 2 days later, Kevin called again. "The Bureau has confirmed receipt of the file," he said. "They'll be watching the gala closely. If she repeats her claims publicly, it becomes evidence of intent." His words carried the weight of inevitability. "Thank you," I said. "That's all I needed to know." After we hung up, I emailed Diane to confirm the seating plan. She replied within minutes. "Head table confirmed. You'll be right beside me." On the morning of the event, I woke before sunrise. The sky was soft gray, the waves flat and even, like calm before a shift in weather. I spent the day quietly, finished some client work, answered emails, and packed a folder with essential documents: the property deed, Kevin's affidavit, the bank's report, and a flash drive of security footage. I slipped it all into my black leather clutch beside my ID and a small notepad. Everything else I left behind. By late afternoon, a car arrived to take me to Los Angeles. The driver held the door and asked for my destination. "Ritz-Carlton," I said. The ride along the coast was silent except for the sound of tires on asphalt and the low hum of evening traffic. As the car wound through the city lights, I watched the horizon fade behind me, a long strip of silver vanishing into darkness. Ahead, the skyline glowed gold and blue. Inside the hotel, chandeliers spilled warm light across marble floors. Guests in evening gowns and tuxedos clustered around tall glass tables, champagne flutes in hand. I found my place card at the head table, Hannah Whitaker, guest of keynote speaker. Across the room, Lorraine's laughter rose above the crowd. She stood near the entrance in a silver gown, greeting guests with practiced charm. When she saw me, her smile faltered just for a heartbeat before settling back into place. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said when I approached. "I could say the same," I replied. "Enjoy your evening, Lorraine." Diane's assistant guided me to my seat. From there I could see the stage, the podium, and the large LED screens cycling through sponsor logos. As the dinner service began, I noticed a few familiar faces investors I'd once negotiated with executives who'd underestimated me years ago. None of them knew the storm quietly brewing in the same ballroom. Halfway through dessert, the association president took the stage. Tonight, he announced we celebrate integrity and leadership in real estate. We're grateful for our gold sponsors whose generosity makes this event possible. Applause rippled across the room. Please welcome Mrs. Lorraine Whitaker. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral as she rose gracefully, nodding to acquaintances along the way. She stood at the podium, her voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all for this incredible honor," she began. The Whitaker name has always stood for excellence and vision. Our newest acquisition in Malibu represents the next chapter of that legacy. Her words floated easily through the air, polished and rehearsed. Behind her, the screen changed to a photo of my home, the deck, the glass walls, the curve of the shoreline. A low murmur spread through the audience as she smiled proudly. "I look forward to hosting many of you there soon." The sound of silverware stilled. Even from across the table, I could see Diane's eyes narrow slightly, the faintest signal. Lorraine finished her speech to light applause, then returned to her seat, oblivious to the subtle shift in the room. I folded my napkin neatly and set it beside my plate. The gala's theme, integrity, glowed on the screens above us in quiet irony. The president returned to the microphone. "And now, please welcome our keynote speaker, Ms. Diane Porter, CEO of Granite Harbor Global." The applause was genuine this time. Diane rose, her posture poised, her expression steady. As she crossed the stage, she paused briefly beside Lorraine, leaned close, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Lorraine's smile falter again. I sat back, fingers resting on the edge of the table, pulse even. The next few minutes would decide the shape of everything that came after. As the lights dimmed and the room quieted, I looked toward the stage where Diane adjusted the microphone and smiled toward the audience. "Tonight," she began, "I want to talk about what real value looks like, not inherited privilege, but earned integrity." Her voice carried easily through the ballroom, smooth and assured. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the reckoning had finally begun. Diane's voice carried easily through the ballroom, low and measured with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding rooms exactly like this one. "Real integrity," she said, "isn't inherited. It's proven by action, especially when no one's watching." Her gaze swept the crowd before settling on me for a fraction of a second, deliberate and steady. Around us, crystal light glittered off 100 glass surfaces. The sound of silverware faded until all that remained was her voice. "Tonight, I want to recognize someone whose work defines that kind of integrity." The screens behind her shifted, the images fading to black and then lighting up again with the soft glow of a professional headshot mine. The caption beneath it read, "Hannah Whitaker, Strategic Consultant, Granite Harbor Global." A low murmur rippled across the tables. Her analytical framework has already transformed the way Fortune 500 companies manage operations, Diane continued. Her next project with us marks one of the largest consulting partnerships in our company's history. The words landed like quiet thunder. Lorraine, still seated at the far end of the head table, froze. The color drained from her face as Diane gestured toward me. "Hannah, would you join me?" Every eye in the room seemed to turn at once. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress, and walked toward the stage. The applause started tentative, then grew stronger. Under the lights, the air felt sharper, cooler. When I reached Diane, she offered a brief smile before turning back to the crowd. "For those curious," she said, "this is the professional behind the digital transformation strategies you've been reading about in the financial ledger. The same strategies that saved companies millions in a single quarter." A whisper spread through the audience. Recognition, surprise, maybe even a touch of embarrassment from those who'd once dismissed me as Lorraine's quiet daughter-in-law. Diane's timing was exact. In business, she said, reputation comes from results, not from who your family is. Then she stepped aside, giving me the microphone. I hadn't planned to speak, but the moment felt like it had been waiting for me all along. "Thank you," I began. "For years, I've worked behind the scenes where the real work often happens. Tonight, standing here, I'm proud that effort speaks for itself." My words were simple, but the silence that followed was electric. Lorraine sat motionless, the muscles around her mouth tight. Then came the voice from the back of the room. "Isn't that the same property your mother-in-law claimed was hers?" The question wasn't shouted, but it carried. Heads turned. The man who'd spoken, a tall, gray-haired banker I didn't know, looked genuinely curious. Diane's expression didn't waver. "I believe you're referring to the Malibu house," she said smoothly. "The property purchased through Whitaker Strategies, LLC, owned solely by Hannah Whitaker." The screen changed again, displaying an image of my home's sunlight over glass and ocean with the deed listed beneath it. Property owner Whitaker Strategies, LLC, Hannah Whitaker. Managing member. The clarity of it was almost surgical. Lorraine gasped quietly, too soft for most to hear, but I caught it. "There's been confusion," Diane continued. "Public claims were made that don't align with recorded ownership. Fortunately, the records speak plainly." Another murmur filled the room. Barbara Caldwell, seated 2 tables away, leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something that made the woman's eyes widen. Lorraine pressed both hands against the tablecloth as if steadying herself. I stayed still, my expression calm. Before anyone could redirect the conversation, another voice rose from the audience, a man introducing himself as Kevin Brooks from Seaside Bank. "If I may," he said politely, "our department recently investigated an attempted loan application using that property as collateral. The application was fraudulent. The rightful owner was not involved." He glanced at me, then added, "All documentation has been turned over to federal authorities." The ballroom went utterly still. Cameras from the media table began to swivel. I could see Lorraine's reflection in the mirrored wall behind us, her face gone pale, her eyes darting toward the exits. Someone whispered her name, and that seemed to break something inside her. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "This is a setup," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant—" But the microphone was still live from her earlier speech. Her words echoed across the speakers, each syllable too clear. "I have every right to that house. My son bought it for me." The audience gasped. Kevin Brooks calmly lifted a folder. "Mrs. Whitaker, we have security footage of you signing the forged documents." Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed again. The lights from the stage caught the glint of her jewelry, making her look more exposed than elegant. 2 security officers from the event staff moved closer, discreet but unmistakable. Diane turned to the crowd. "This evening was meant to honor integrity," she said softly. "And perhaps it still will." The association president, looking shaken, stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitaker, please remain seated while we resolve this." Lorraine backed away instead, bumping into a server carrying a tray of wine glasses. The sound of breaking crystal rang across the ballroom like punctuation. She whispered something to Andrew, but he didn't stand. His face was pale, his hands clasped tightly on the table in front of him. I met his eyes across the distance. For a moment the room disappeared around us. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head, like a man finally seeing the wreckage he'd ignored for years. Then he looked down. Kevin stepped to the front of the stage and addressed the host. "We've notified law enforcement. They're on their way." Diane nodded to the security team. Lorraine tried to speak again, but her voice broke. "This is my family's reputation," she said weakly. "You can't destroy me like this." Diane's answer was quiet, almost kind. "No one destroyed you, Lorraine. You did this yourself." A few people began to applaud, not loud or mocking, just a slow, deliberate rhythm that grew as more joined in. It wasn't for her downfall. It was for the truth finally spoken aloud. I stood beside Diane, steady under the lights, feeling the weight of years lift. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers entered through the side doors. They approached the table where Lorraine stood, trembling, her silver gown dull under the chandeliers. One officer spoke gently. "Mrs. Whitaker, we need to ask you to come with us." She hesitated, then turned toward me. "You did this," she whispered. I didn't answer. The truth didn't need words. The officers guided her out of the room as the audience watched in uneasy silence. A few reporters had already started typing their screens, reflecting flashes of movement. Somewhere a camera clicked. The woman who'd once called me invisible now left surrounded by the only attention she'd ever feared: public scrutiny. When the doors closed behind her, the room exhaled. Diane leaned toward me. "It's over," she said. I nodded. though we both knew it wasn't completely over yet. The damage Lorraine had done to her reputation to Andrew to herself would echo long after tonight. As the event resumed, the atmosphere softened. Guests whispered, servers moved quietly, and the band played something low and steady to fill the air. Andrew rose, finally walked to where I stood near the stage and stopped a few feet away. "I didn't know she'd gone that far," he said quietly. "I should have stopped it years ago." "You can't stop what you refuse to see," I said. His eyes flicked toward the doors where his mother had disappeared. "What happens now?" "Accountability," I said simply. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Socialite arrested at charity gala for real estate fraud. The photo of Lorraine being escorted out of the ballroom appeared beside a still image of the property deed, my name printed in bold. The story spread faster than either of us could have imagined. By noon, calls began flooding in news outlets, former colleagues, even strangers thanking me for standing my ground. I didn't respond to most of them. Instead, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the tide roll in. The air smelled of salt and freedom. Michael called to confirm the formal charges had been filed. "She'll likely face multiple counts of fraud and forgery," he said, "but the choice to press forward is yours." "I want her held accountable," I replied, "but I also want this to end cleanly." He understood. "We'll handle it." As the day faded into evening, I walked down to the sand. The water was cold around my ankles, but it grounded me. Above the horizon, a line of orange light stretched thin and bright, fading into the deep blue of night. The world felt bigger again, less like a cage, more like a promise. Behind me, the house stood quiet and steady glass, catching the last of the sun. Tomorrow would bring meeting statements, legal documents, but for now there was calm. I turned toward the sound of the waves, steady and endless, and knew the hardest part was over. What came next would be mine to decide. The days that followed the gala blurred together in a rhythm of phone calls, headlines, and documents that needed signing. Lorraine's arrest had become the story of the week. Every major outlet replayed the footage from that ballroom, her silver gown under the stage lights, her defiant words echoing through the speakers, the officers leading her quietly away. The same woman who once measured reputation like currency had become a symbol of public disgrace. I spent most mornings on the deck with coffee in hand, listening to the water hit the rocks below. The air felt clearer now, quieter. The world was still moving fast, but inside this house, everything had slowed to something almost peaceful. Michael called daily to update me. "The case will take time," he said. "But the evidence is strong and the investigators are thorough. You did everything right, Hannah." His reassurance helped, though the idea of victory still felt complicated. Andrew had been staying in a small apartment near the city since the night of the gala. He called once the day after the news broke. "She's being charged with wire fraud, forgery, and false representation," he said softly. "Her friends are distancing themselves. Some of them won't even return my calls." I didn't know what to say, so I listened. "You warned me for years," he added after a pause. "I didn't want to see it." I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, the small noise of a man standing in the wreckage of denial. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. "That's up to you," I said, and then we both fell quiet. By the end of the week, a formal apology appeared in the Los Angeles Tribune. Lorraine's attorney had written it on her behalf, citing deep regret and misguided assumptions. It was careful, legal, and empty, but the damage was irreversible. The real estate board suspended her membership. The charity committee removed her name from every plaque, and her accounts were frozen pending investigation. The woman who once filled rooms with laughter and influence now had nothing left but her own echo. Diane came by a few days later, bringing fresh flowers and a calm I hadn't realized I needed. "How are you holding up?" she asked, setting the vase on the counter. "Lighter," I admitted. "And tired." She smiled faintly. "That's what closure feels like, weight leaving your body one piece at a time." We sat on the deck for a while, letting the sea breeze move between us. After a moment, she turned toward me. "You handled that night with grace. It wasn't revenge, Hannah. It was truth delivered with composure. There's a difference." The next morning, my phone rang just as I was finishing breakfast. It was Kevin Brooks. "You'll be glad to know," he said, "the bank closed its case this morning." Lorraine has been permanently barred from holding any joint financial authority or opening new accounts without oversight. The Bureau's file is moving to the district attorney's office. I thanked him, and before hanging up, he added, "It's rare to see someone handle this with such restraint. Most people would have made a spectacle of it." His words stayed with me long after the line went dead. Later that week, I returned to work. Granite Harbor's new contract had officially begun, and my days filled with what I knew best: strategy sessions, quiet meetings, and clean execution. Diane introduced me to her senior partners as the woman who turned a storm into structure. It wasn't flattery. It was her way of reminding me that competence once unseen had finally been recognized. My role expanded, my team grew, and the press coverage shifted from scandal to accomplishment. Still, the shadow of what had happened lingered in small ways. I'd see my last name in headlines and pause for a second before remembering that Whitaker no longer belonged to Lorraine alone. Some nights I'd walk the beach barefoot, letting the surf pull at the edge of my dress, and think about all the versions of myself I'd left behind, one who tolerated small cruelties, another who stayed silent to keep the peace. The woman standing in the dark water now owed nothing to those versions anymore. One evening, Andrew appeared at the gate unannounced. He stood there with a paper bag in hand and a look that belonged to someone trying to start over. Redstone's guard called before letting him through. When he stepped inside, he hesitated near the doorway, glancing at the view as if seeing it for the first time. "I brought dinner," he said quietly. I nodded toward the kitchen. "Let's eat then." We sat across from each other, plates between us, the sound of the ocean filling the silence. "She called from county," he said eventually. "She's asking for leniency, says she'll repay the money." I didn't answer right away. "Will you?" I asked. "No," he said. "Not this time." He looked down at his hands. "I've spent most of my life letting her write the story for both of us. I'm done." His voice cracked just slightly. "You were right about everything, Hannah. I just didn't want it to be true." After dinner, we walked down the steps toward the sand. The sky was turning purple over the horizon. He stopped halfway and looked toward the house. "You did all this without her help," he said softly. "Without mine, too." "I did what I had to do," I replied. He nodded. "I want to earn my way back to that kind of honesty." When he left later that night, the air felt lighter again. Not finished, but clearing. For the first time, I believed he might finally be ready to face his own truth. A few days later, Barbara called to tell me the committee had removed Lorraine from every leadership post. "They asked if you'd consider taking her place," she said gently. I laughed softly. "I think the community needs someone new, Barbara, someone untouched by all this." She agreed. "For what it's worth, people respect you now. They see what she tried to hide." By the end of the month, Lorraine's trial date was set. The prosecutors filed charges on 3 counts of financial fraud and 1 of identity falsification. Michael sent me the formal notice with a note attached, "You're listed as key witness. Be ready." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the drawer beside the original deed, the one that had started everything. That night I walked through the house, switching off lights 1 room at a time. The walls no longer echoed with tension. They felt settled, like the space finally belonged to the life I'd built inside it. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the moon move across the surface of the water. Somewhere in the distance, a boat passed its light, trailing like a quiet line of hope across the dark. The storm was over, but its lessons lingered in the calm that followed. I wasn't angry anymore or even relieved. I was simply still solid in a way I hadn't been in years. And though I knew there were hearings and headlines yet to come, the fear was gone. The truth had already spoken, and this time everyone had listened. Tomorrow I'd meet Michael at the courthouse to finalize statements, but tonight I let the ocean fill the silence and the salt wind brush against the glass. The tide kept its steady rhythm, carrying away what was finished and leaving only what was meant to stay. The courthouse sat on a quiet stretch of downtown Los Angeles, its glass facade catching the morning light like a mirror. The air inside was cold and still, the kind of quiet that settles before something decisive. I arrived early with Michael, the echo of our footsteps following us down the marble corridor. We checked in with the clerk, then found our seats near the front. The bench was hard beneath me, but my hands stayed steady. Months of waiting had led to this single morning. Lorraine entered 20 minutes later, escorted by her attorney. The woman who once demanded attention in every room now looked smaller, her confidence stripped down to something brittle. Her hair was pulled back, her pearls traded for plain gold studs. She didn't look at me when she passed, though I felt her eyes linger for a moment before she turned away. Andrew sat behind her, pale and quiet, a man torn between loyalty and truth. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The session began with procedural readings charges, evidence statements already filed. I recognized my own name more than once. Plaintiff Hannah Whitaker. Entity Whitaker Strategies, LLC. Each mention sounded detached, like it belonged to someone else. Michael's presence beside me was grounding. His calm had become the rhythm I followed through every motion, every pause. Kevin Brooks testified first. He walked through the sequence of events with precision, the forged documents, the timestamps, the digital fingerprints linking Lorraine to the online loan submission. Screens displayed the evidence for the court, her name typed where mine should have been, her signature, copied from an old file. The room stayed silent except for Kevin's voice and the occasional scratch of pens on notepads. When my turn came, I stood, took the oath, and faced the courtroom. My voice didn't shake. I described the phone call when Lorraine announced she was moving in the attempted break-in, the social media claims, the forged loan, all in order, each detail backed by documentation. The judge listened carefully, expression unreadable. Lorraine's attorney tried to object, once claiming family misunderstanding, but the evidence made that argument collapse under its own weight. By noon, the testimony was complete. The judge called for recess and I stepped outside for air. The sun felt warmer than I remembered the noise of the city grounding after hours in that still courtroom. Diane met me on the steps, her hand resting briefly on my arm. "You did exactly what you needed to," she said. "Now let the system finish the rest." Inside, the afternoon moved quickly. Lorraine's attorney delivered a short defense, a plea for leniency based on emotional stress and confusion, a claim that her actions had been misguided, not malicious. The words fell flat against the facts. When Lorraine was invited to speak, she stood slowly, hands clasped in front of her. "I made mistakes," she said. "I thought the property was part of our family holdings. I only wanted what I was promised." Her voice trembled. "I never meant to hurt anyone." I didn't flinch. Promises had never included forgery or trespassing or lies told on national news. The courtroom stayed quiet until the judge returned. She reviewed the findings one final time, her tone neutral but firm. "The evidence presented leaves no doubt that the actions were deliberate," she said. "Intent can be measured not by words, but by consistency of behavior." The verdict was straightforward guilty on all charges. Sentencing would follow in 30 days, but the immediate consequences were clear: financial restitution, professional blacklisting, and court-ordered therapy. Lorraine sat motionless, staring at the table in front of her. Andrew closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping under the weight of it. The sound of the gavel echoed once final and absolute. When the session adjourned, reporters waited outside the courthouse. Their cameras caught everything: the contrast between the woman escorted out by officers and the one walking past quietly with her head held high. Diane guided me through the crowd, while Michael fielded their questions with practiced calm. "My client has no further comment," he said, and that was that. We reached the car, and for a long moment I just watched the sunlight flicker across the windshield. "It's strange," I said softly, "how something can end so loudly and still feel quiet inside." Diane nodded. "Closure isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the absence of chaos." The following week, news outlets shifted from scandal to outcome. Whitaker convicted in real estate fraud case ran across headlines nationwide. The narrative turned quickly praise for accountability interviews about ethics commentary on how easily influence can blur boundaries. Granite Harbor's public relations team used the opportunity to highlight transparency and leadership, and my name began appearing beside words like integrity and resilience. The same last name that once carried shame now carried its own quiet weight. Andrew visited the house a few days after the verdict. He looked older, worn down, but honest in a way I hadn't seen in years. "She's under house supervision now," he said. "Everything's been taken from her accounts memberships, even the charity positions." I nodded. Maybe it's what she needs to finally face herself. He hesitated before speaking again. "You're free of her now. I wanted you to know I'm proud of how you handled it." The words surprised me, not for their content, but for their sincerity. "Thank you," I said. He looked toward the ocean through the glass walls. "Do you think she'll change?" "I think she'll have to," I replied. "The world won't bend for her anymore." That night I stood on the deck long after the lights of the city faded. The ocean moved in its endless rhythm below a sound that had become as familiar as breathing. Inside, my office glowed softly with the light from my laptop. Messages had poured in, notes from clients, new inquiries, even a request for a speaking engagement about corporate ethics. One headline caught my eye: "The Woman Who Redefined Boundaries." It felt surreal but fitting. Michael called later that evening. "I wanted to tell you the civil proceedings are settled," he said. "Restitution will be handled through asset liquidation. You won't have to see her again." "Good," I answered quietly. "That part's done." He paused. "And Hannah, congratulations. You turned a personal ordeal into precedent. Not many people could have done that." After the call, I walked through the house. Lights dimmed, air calm. On the dining table sat the same leather folder that once held the deed and documents I'd guarded so fiercely. I opened it one last time, checked that every page was intact, then closed it for good. The house was no longer just proof of survival. It was a sanctuary built from it. When I reached the window, the reflection staring back felt older, stronger, and unshakably certain. Lorraine's empire had collapsed, but mine had only begun to rise, an empire of disciplined trust and hard-earned peace. The foundation wasn't marble or money. It was truth finally seen and protected. The next morning, an email from Diane arrived. "Press wants to feature you on Granite Harbor's leadership campaign. Forbes, possibly Fortune. Think about it." I read the message twice, then smiled. Outside, the first light touched the horizon. The sea glittered like a field of broken glass, mending itself with every wave. Justice had been served, but something deeper had taken its place: equilibrium. I watched the tide roll in steady and bright and realized I wasn't standing in the shadow of anyone's name anymore. Tomorrow I would decide what came next. For now, the quiet was enough. The months after the trial felt different, quieter, but full, in a way that still surprised me. The noise around Lorraine's downfall faded as the news cycle moved on, replaced by new scandals and fresh stories. But here in my world, everything slowed into balance. The beach house that once felt like a refuge now felt like home. Every corner carried proof of what I'd built, not from inheritance or luck, but from perseverance and clear boundaries. Andrew kept his promise to start over. He sold what remained of his real estate firm and took a position with a sustainable development company outside San Diego. It suited him: honest work, steady hours, no shortcuts. We began therapy together, one session at a time. There were no grand declarations or sweeping apologies, just a slow rebuilding of trust through consistent honesty. For the first time in years, our conversations felt equal, built on listening instead of habit. Lorraine's sentencing came in early spring. The judge ordered 18 months of probation, community service, and mandatory counseling for narcissistic behavior patterns. Most of her assets went toward restitution and legal fees. The rest was sold off quietly, the way forgotten things are. She wrote once through her attorney 3 pages in neat, careful handwriting. "I spent a lifetime mistaking control for love," she wrote. "And when control slipped away, I mistook envy for purpose." "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't about letters or grand gestures anymore. It was about finally releasing her hold on my peace. Barbara stopped by a few weeks later with a basket of scones and a letter from the charity board. They'd renamed one of their annual scholarships after me, the Whitaker Women in Leadership Grant, honoring resilience and ethical leadership. "It's poetic justice," she said with a smile. "Something good rising out of something painful." I framed the announcement and placed it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that grace can still grow from hard soil. Work flourished beyond anything I'd planned. Granite Harbor's partnership became the cornerstone of my consulting firm. New clients reached out, drawn by the story of boundaries turned into empowerment. Forbes ran a feature titled "Earning Freedom: The Quiet Power of Hannah Whitaker," and the headline still felt surreal when I read it. But more than recognition, it was the life underneath that mattered: the calm mornings, the ocean view from my office window, the simple rhythm of work that no longer revolved around proving myself. Diane visited often. We'd sit on the deck, share coffee, and talk about everything except business. One evening as the sun dipped low, she said, "You realize you didn't just survive this, you redefined what respect looks like." I smiled at her, the sea wind lifting the edge of her scarf. "Respect isn't something others give," I said quietly. "It's something you stop negotiating." She laughed softly. "You should put that on a plaque." By summer, the house had transformed. The walls were filled with art from local women I'd met through community programs. My home office had become a hub of quiet industry meetings, mentorship calls, and long hours of writing. Sometimes I'd pause mid-call, catch sight of the ocean shimmering through the window, and feel the same awe I did the first night I stood here. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it symbolized: peace, earned, not borrowed. One afternoon, Andrew came by with coffee and 2 boxes of takeout. He looked rested, content in a way I hadn't seen in years. "The therapist says Mom's making progress," he said. "She still has a long way to go, but she's learning to live without control." I nodded, letting the words settle. "That's good," I said, "for her and for you." We ate quietly, the sound of waves breaking just beyond the glass. When he left that evening, he paused at the door. "Thank you for not giving up on yourself," he said. "It showed me how to stop giving up on mine." As the months passed, I built new rituals: morning walks before calls, dinner with friends on Fridays, handwritten notes to women I mentored. Every act, however small, felt like reclaiming space I'd once given away. The life I had now wasn't defined by who hurt me, but by how I chose to heal. One morning a letter arrived, addressed in careful script. It was from a young woman named Elise, a scholarship recipient from the program that bore my name. "Your story reminded me that I'm allowed to set boundaries," she wrote, "that I can build something of my own and still be kind. Thank you for proving that strength doesn't have to shout." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it beside Lorraine's letter. The contrast between them told a story of transformation, from harm to hope, from entitlement to understanding. Now every evening I step out onto the deck as the sun slides beneath the water. The air smells of salt and cedar, and the horizon stretches wide and forgiving. I think about how life has a way of circling back, not to what was lost, but to what's finally been made whole. The woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet, who tried to please, feels like a memory from another life. In her place stands someone who learned that peace is the loudest form of power there is. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or made to doubt your own worth, remember this: the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs space to breathe. And when it finally does, it can change everything. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it reminded you of your own strength or helped you find a piece of calm, you'd forgotten, share it with someone who needs it. And always remember, you deserve respect in your own home, in your work, and in your heart.